Vitamin Water Zero Sugar has great taste, zero BS, and obviously zero sugar. For those with zero room in their calendar, zero patience for slow walkers, those who get 0 hours of sleep on a Saturday night, have zero filter, zero given, and zero interest in grabbing a plain, boring water. Grab a delicious Vitamin Water Zero Sugar today.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the Dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like expecting the leadership of a team captain on the football field, but getting a sea captain. You wouldn't settle for just anything for your team. Shouldn't it be the same for your insurance? So don't settle for just any insurance when you can go with a leader. State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to our weekly episode of On This Week on Hawaii the podcast. And if you are expecting Martin's dulcet tones for our Jackanory style trip down memory lane, I do apologise because it must be National Barbecue Day or something in Australia. And unfortunately, he can't make it. So unfortunately, you're stuck with me this week. But luckily, I have our usual storytellers to help us along. And first up, we have Andrew Smithson. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. And, this is on the back of our top 10 managers the other day. Have you recovered from that? Without giving any spoilers, just in case people haven't listened to it yet.
No comment, Chris.
But it's good fun though, isn't it? Putting like trying to rank things like that, because everyone thinks differently about it, doesn't it?
It was enjoyable, and yeah, if people haven't had chance to catch up with it yet, it's well worth a little listen. Although, as I say that, I think I'm signing my own death warrant because the reaction I got was a little bit took me by surprise. But yeah, good fun, good one. That I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we'll do a lot more on that and try and rank things and invite the anger of social media upon us once again. But all good fun. And also joining us is, of course, I think the legend that is Kelvin Beattie. Hello, mate.
Morning, chaps. Morning. How are you both this morning?
Yeah, not bad.
Good.
Thank you very much.
I'm excited today. I'm going on a shopping trip to Jackie White's.
We're still fishing desperately for that sponsorship, aren't we? From Jackie White's. We want that picture on the pod logo all the time, don't we?
Yes.
It's iconic. Basically, that doorway, isn't it, to Jackie White's, Andrew?
Oh yeah. I mean, genuinely, it got brought up in a recent episode. I do go in there regular. Yeah. If ever I need, industrial strength bin bags or anything like that, that's the place to go.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a really bad read I'm doing now, but yeah,
this is the new advert for Jackie White.
Yeah, go there for all your needs.
People will be thinking we've got a sweepstake or something on how quickly we mention Jackie White's Market in every one of these On This Week pods. It's like, you remember when I think it was Matt Letitia's Southampton, like back in the day in his book, he wrote that they used to knock the ball back to him and he used to smash it out of play.
Yeah.
Because they all used to bet on how quickly the first throw-in was.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Got a list of foreign betting syndicates here telling me when to mention the fishmongers and Jackie White.
It's about 30 seconds today, so I'm gonna check what the betting pattern was on that. Okay, well, look, let's get into it because we've got quite a few things to get through today. And today, so we're looking from, obviously on this week, we're looking from June the 16th through to June the 22nd, I make it. So we'll start with items from June the 16th. We've got all the way back in 1889, and even one that Kelvin can't remember. So we managed to find one. We've got the birth of 1913 League Championship winning halfback Francis Cuggy, and he was born in Roker, Newcastle. We don't know much about him, Andrew, but he was a big name.
He was, yes, like you say, he was part of the title-winning team. I think alongside Charlie Buchan and Jackie Mordew. That's Mordew, not White. The three of them had
your money's totting up every time you
of course it is, yeah. I got to pay for all those top quality items somehow, you know. I've lost my train of thought. Yes, those three were the stars of that team. I think the three of them formed a bit of a combination on the pitch, and between them drove the team onto the title. So definitely, Cuggy is an unusual surname, but it's one that has a big place in the history of the club.
Yeah, well, that's it. We won the title by 4 points that season, and he played 41 games in all competitions that year. So, and this was in our glory years, and that was, of course, our biggest chance to win the double as well, Andrew, that season.
It was, and I think if we'd pulled that off, I mean, we talk about the fact we reached the final plenty, but if we'd pulled that off, that would have really kind of cemented our place in football history. I don't think anybody had achieved it by that point, so it was, you know, we came pretty close.
We did, and you know, we would have always been able to have one over them up the road because we beat them in the fourth round in a second replay as well. So it would have been the perfect season, doing the first double in English football, beating them on the way in the FA Cup. And it was just that one game against Aston Villa that we just quite couldn't manage it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say it now, but let's say it. It's the first time, typical Sunderland, I suppose, really, on that. It's the first time we've said it today. Okay, so next on the list, we've got 1972. Fullback Cecil Irwin was transferred to Yeovil Town to take up a player manager role because Kelvin, you know, born in Northumberland, he spent his whole career at Sunderland, you know, playing well over 300 games for Sunderland, started in the 50s, left in the 70s, and recently passed away in April of this year, which was sad to hear. But it's always one of these names, you know, when you hear about a fullback, and I've mentioned it to you quite a few times when we're not recording that, you know, these players are huge names. And I've read a lot about Sunderland, and you think, wow, you know, Cecil Irwin, you know, that many games at fullback, over 300 games, spanning over 3 decades, 50s, 60s, 70s. And you think, wow, but, you know, can you kind of describe what type of player he actually was?
Well, he was one of those players. Certainly, when I started watching in 1966, he just always seemed to be there playing. You know, he was a big lad. He was a big fullback. Sort of, you might have described him as raw-boned. You know, he looked like he was a bit of a clogger, but he was a strong tackler. But I'll tell you what he was most noted for was charging down his wing and crossing. He was like one of your earliest, sort of raiding fullbacks of more modern era, like a wing back almost. Spent a lot of time charging down his wing. I think his fellow defenders might say that he probably spent too much time charging down his wing. But he was part of I'm going to say a clique, but in the positive sense, of players who always seemed to be there in the 60s. You know, Jimmy Montgomery, Irwin, Ashurst, McNabb. Irwin, Ashurst and McNabb made their debuts together. And I think Irwin was just 16 years old. I didn't see that debut. I grew into him from 1966 onwards. Big lad, not bad in the air, very good going forward. I have to say I have seen him turned over a couple of times by a flying winger. He when he was going forward, he had to switch his reverse lights on to turn himself around and get back again. But
I know how it feels.
Yeah. Part of as I say, part of a clique of players who seemed to always be there in the 60s. Irwin, McNabb, Hurley, Martin Harvey. He played with Stan Anderson as well through the Browns' first period with the club. Charlie Hurley, Hurd, Mulhall. He played in that era. Played in the 63-64 team that got promotion, and played on till Dick Malone's arrival at the club. He's playing less and less when Malone comes along. The one thing I hadn't realised, it was something that dawned on me afterwards when I was looking at his career. He played right back. That's what he played. There wasn't, you don't really see him popping up anywhere else, And yet he was a big lad, I sort of think there were times when, say, Martin Harvey at 5'9" was playing centre half, and Cecil Irwin at 6 foot plus is playing right back, and you're thinking, could they not have eased him in there and got him just a little bit more variety out of him? I don't know, but he was a smashing. It was smashing to see him flying down his wing in full flight. A big lad to stop in full flight. Bit of an express train when he got going, but he could cross the ball. He wasn't. Who do I always? It's like a negative compare. I always used to think Howard Gale used to fly down the wing, but you were more in danger of getting to head the ball at the back of the Roker end if he was heading for you than Irwin could. He was a canny crosser of the ball. I always remember Neil Martin, I think, benefiting from he seemed to have his radar set to Neil Martin a bit when he played for us. So good, steady, there every week, not injured that often. Good partnerships with the players in front of him. I remember it wasn't to the extent of Malone and Kerr, but him and Hurd, because they played together a lot, kind of were on each other's radar. Hurd was a clever player that would slide a ball into him into space, and off he would go. Fond memories of Cecil Irwin. Even in some ways, when he used to get caught upfield, you kind of would shrug your shoulders and go, well, that's Cecil Irwin, that's what he does. He goes raiding down the right, and he had a bit of football in him. It was interesting, Dick Malone coming along after him, because you might have almost said they were chipped out of the same mould. Mm. I think Dick was more sort of slender than Irwin, but they were both the same. 9 times out of 10, when you looked up to see where they were, or they're playing their right back position, no, they're not. They're down in the right wing, trying to cross or score goals or get assists. It was interesting that Malone came right after Irwin, because to me they were two very, very similar fullbacks.
Just out of interest, Kelvin, because obviously, I'm quite interested in this side of it. That, when you're talking about a fullback, in this day and age? Because you're talking about late 50s when Cecil Irwin came in. That's kind of when you're talking about that role of fullback actually changing, aren't you?
Well, actually, I was hoping that we need to talk about this when we're talking about Martin Harvey today, because the formation, it was Alf Ramsey was one of the pioneers of the 4-4-2 formation, which really changed kind of lineups and challenged players in lots of different ways. Some of them rose to the challenge, like Martin Harvey. Some of them struggled a bit with it in terms of where they would end up playing and who with. When I think in a sort of, what would you call that, a 2-3-5 formation back then. I suppose he had a little bit of license to get forward. You know, him. If you think about the defence, then the back five, if I could put it that way, more often than not, you've got Irwin, you've got Stan Anderson, who's an England international and a smashing, clever, intelligent ball player, who, you know, he wasn't given to rushes of blood and flying up and, you know, creating big gaps. He would do it, but he played his right half position in a very disciplined kind of way, Anderson. So I'm told. I never saw Anderson play for the club. That's all crack that I get from boys that are just a bit older than me tell me about him. You've then got Charlie Hurley, Jim McNabb, and Len Ashurst on the other side. And Ashurst, you know, they played a lot of that, an awful lot of that career together, Ashurst and Irwin. When I started watching, they were called the Flower Pot Men. They're called Ashurst and when there was a great kids program called the Flower Pot Men, Bill and Ben, the Flower Pot Men, and it used to make me laugh because it was a lovely, gentle rhyme, you know, that went something like Bill and Ben, Flower Pot Men, you know, and you'd be sitting listening to that and thinking, Len Ashurst doesn't look anything like a flower pot man to me. He looks like he would eat you for breakfast, you know. So Ashurst was definitely if I would say, the roughest of the two of them. I mean, he was a raw-boned, rough left back, Ashurst, who again had a bit of football in him, but he was, you know, his stamina, he had pace. Ashurst, as did Irwin. You know, these lads were pretty fit characters. These two, you know, they made a bit of a pairing. You probably, as I say, in the 60s, more often than not, it was Ashurst on one fullback berth and Irwin in the other. Yeah.
Just I mean, just because looking at his career at Sunderland, and you mentioned that he was huge in terms of that promotion in 63-64. But then I was looking for the next 5 seasons. We didn't finish any higher than 15th in the first division. I mean, was Cecil Irwin one of those players who, because I looked as well, and he didn't quite play as many games in the next couple of seasons as he did in that promotion season. But no. Was he one of the players who maybe found it a little bit difficult when he stepped up to the top 5?
So there was that. There was the step up to the top flight. And there was when you look at what was going on at the club at the time as well. You know, the McCall era at the club. You've got the combination of formations changing. We're moving to 4-4-2 generally. You've got Ian McCall coming in as manager, and you know, McCall had his own ideas about what he wanted in the team, how he wanted the team to play, but Irwin wasn't the only player to suffer at the hands of that particular era. I always feel like you should talk about that era as the Baxter McCall era, because there was times where Jim Baxter was clearly picking the team and informing players who was playing and who wasn't playing. Not a clever period. And when you look at the combination of generally you're playing against better players because you're playing in the first division, and you've got this change in formation going on, and as a fullback, you're probably feeling a little bit more exposed. He was less exposed generally than Lenny Ashurst in that, because Ashurst had Baxter playing in front of him, and Baxter wasn't inclined to come. And I loved watching Jim Baxter play, but it's these things you don't realise as a kid when you're watching one of your favourite players play, that Baxter wasn't great at getting back and helping out, and Lenny Ashurst often felt overexposed as that change in formation was going on. Thankfully, in front of him generally was George Hurd. Cecil Irwin had George Hurd, and he was as fit as a loppy dog and could run all day, so he was an honest player, George Hurd. And Irwin himself was quoted a few times about Hurd's ability to get back and help the defence out on his side. He often played he played generally on the right-hand side, Hurd. So they had that kind of understanding and relationship. I guess, if I'd go back to what I said about him, and I'm speaking anecdotally here, as a lad, I used to love watching Irwin charge down the wing, but he wasn't that, like turning around if he lost the ball. He was like a train, he'd have to run on 10 yards to spin around and come back again. In the meantime, your flying wingers have gone. They're up and right in the face of our defence and box. So I think he was a little bit vulnerable that way, and a little bit vulnerable 4-4-2 formation. He had to change his sort of inclinations a little bit. He also had a lad called I think I can't remember who it was that bought John Park. I think he was there before Ian McCall, but John Park came in from Hibernian, and John Park was a Northern Irish international, colleague of Martin Harvey's at Northern Ireland, and by all accounts wasn't a bad player. But Park played right back, and he put Irwin. I think there was quite a bit of competition and pressure for his position there, and Park was a Scot. Had played in Scotland. McCall was aware of him, and whether you believe the conspiracy theories, Park was he came from the right side of the tracks, religious-wise, as far as McCall was concerned. So, but by all, I saw John Park play, and he was a decent player. So there was competition for Cecil Irwin. Definitely, he was placed under a bit of pressure to perform in the first division. But generally, I would say he was a very popular player with the fans. And when he got a gallop on, people would love to see him charging down his wing. He played a different wing, but I was trying to think of who's he like in a more modern era, but I can only jump forward like one era and think he was a little bit like Joe Bolton. When Bolton, we all used to love to see Joe Bolton charging down his wing. Joe Bolton wasn't just a hard tackler and who try Hume style put people over onto the red ash track. He had football in him, Joe Bolton. He was an express train, a bit like Irwin. When he was going the way he was facing, he was very, very hard to stop. And Irwin definitely was a bit like that. He was an Ashington lad. He came from Ellington, just not far away from Ashington. and he was one of that Ashington clique, the Ashington, the biggest village in the world at one time. Ashington produced a whole host of northeastern players, the Charltons, the Milburns.
You talk about him there, Kelvin, from coming from that part of the world. He regularly travelled down to watch Sunderland on the bus, a bit like yourself, really. And I love hearing stories like that. Somebody who played for Sunderland at Roker Park, but years before that, as a little kid, was you talk about these big burly shipbuilders and coal miners singing Bill and Ben the Flower Pot Men. Irwin, however many years beforehand, he was the one on the terrace doing the chanting, supporting the team. I always like to see that story. It's a nice one to read about.
Yeah. I think it's part of the Ashington was, the number of pits that were around Ashington and the number of Durham miners that moved north gravitated north over that time. And he's part of that sort of era. But I mean, it was a hotbed of football. If the Northeast, a hotbed region of football, Ashington was a hotbed of football. As a Morpeth lad, I can tell you, I've been across there a few times playing, and even at Sunday morning level, had our calls put in by teams that they seem to produce players at every level who could play a bit. A real hotbed village as it was at the time. He's a very popular lad in Ashington. He ran a news agents for a long time in Ashington, and he had a spell, I'm sure, of almost player managing Ashington I think they would be in the Northern League at the time. He's a popular lad, very popular lad in Ashington.
And another thing I noticed, actually, Kelvin, was he was only 30 when he left, which doesn't sound old. But like you said, Malone had kind of come in to take his place. I mean, was that how things were done then, in terms of, that were players needing to set themselves up for what was next? Because he went to Yeovil to take up a player manager role. I mean, but 30 still sounds young.
Well, remember, he started his career really early as well. He was 16 when he made his debut, and was a big lad at 16. 16 when he made his debut. I don't know this 100%. I always remember talking again, one of the old worthies on the bus about him. We got on about him one day, and he was saying, when he left, he'd spoken to Alan Brown about, what's the future here, and will I get a contract? I think his contract was up, and Brownie was dead straight with him and said, I don't think so. In a way, did the right thing, did right by him and said, start looking around, get yourself sorted, you're heading into an era. But he would be one of them players, and honestly, I'm struggling to think of one at the moment. But because he started so young, by the time he gets to 30, he's done 11, 12 years yeah.
Well, I think we had a few under, and actually, if you look at the Dennis Smith era, that the likes of Gary Hours and Gordon Armstrong, who by the time they were 2021 had played something like 200 games.
Yeah.
And if you look at where their careers, they burst onto the scene and they were coveted by quite a few clubs, and by their late 20s, their careers were kind of going downward.
One of the things I do, I'm more thinking anecdotally about Cecil Irwin now. One of the things that we used to compare him to Bobby Charlton, but it was nothing to do with his football and everything to do with the hairstyle.
I was waiting for that. There had to be something behind that setup.
and the fact they both came from Ashington. Yeah, there were two Ashington boys. Something in the air there, I think.
I'm trying not to be as gullible as Martin because you did him like a kipper the other week. So I'm I've got my shackles up waiting for you to set me up. But actually, when you described him, Kelvin, I mean, from a young lad like me, Kelvin, and people dispute that. But I mean, from the way you described them, marauding up, I mean, I first thought of Gary Bennett. They were coming out of defence like that.
Yeah, Bennett was. I suppose it wouldn't be the perfect comparison for me. I think Bennett was more. He had a lot more mobility. Bennett had a bit of a turn on him. I think I really do mean it when I say Cecil was when he was going the way he was facing. You were going to have a. You really wanted him to stop before he got off the pitch and into the Roker end, or he was going to hit you like a ton of bricks, So, very, very fond of him as a player. He's just somebody that always seemed to be there when I first started going. He looked older than he was, but I suspect, just coming back to that point about him. And being 30, when you think of how long he'd been playing, I mean, when he started playing, his body wouldn't have been fully grown. He would have still been. And I don't know how good. I do sometimes wonder about that and wonder how good that would have been for you, in terms of longevity.
Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah, just we were talking a few moments ago about Irwin being up and down the wing. What was the name of that game you used to have in the 80s and 90s where you had the players and you had to twiddle the little...
Oh, Pro Action Football. I had one of them. Was it?
Yeah, the one that when you switched it on, it made your TV go fuzzy and it would drive your mum and dad.
You could spin them and move them up and down. And there was one on each flank and one in the middle. And I had one of those. It's funny, actually, because when, like my lad a couple of years ago, I was genuinely, I thought, this is a brilliant game. I've got to get one for me and my lad. But you could only get them off eBay, and they were the originals. So you had to spend like 500 quid for one of these original toys. So I'm not getting him a game he's just going to break for 500 quid.
Well, instead, just show him a bit of footage of Irwin. By the sound of it, it sounds like he was that type of player. He couldn't move across the pitch; he just went up and down in straight lines.
God, I'm probably being a bit harsh. I'm sure there'll be loads of Cecil Irwin fans giving me a hard time about that.
The thing is, Kelvin, I think it was just the way the game was back then. It's not a criticism of Irwin. From what I understand, he was very good at doing that. It's just maybe the way football's played now, a fullback would be expected to do different things. I don't think Irwin comes across badly from this at all. From what I gather, he was a good player for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, let's move on to another fullback. And this time as a fullback coming into the club on the 16th of June in 1989. We signed Paul Hardyman from Portsmouth. In the end, it was for 130,000 purely because it went to a tribunal. Now, it's a really weird one because, a bit of context that we'd come up from the third division and we'd finished 11th in the second division in our first season. And I think Dennis Smith had been looking to try and solve that left back issue, I think, during that season. And he went after Paul Hardyman in the summer. Now, John Gregory was manager of Portsmouth at the time, and he was demanding something like $250,000 for him. And Dennis Smith, of course, being Dennis Smith and wanting to buy him for, 2 bags of crisps and a can of Coke or something like that, obviously refused. And it was going backwards and forwards. And it's really bizarre because we'd finished 11th, Andrew, in that first season in the second division. And this was kind of the transfer saga of the summer, and he ended up being the only signing that we made. But I could imagine at the time, Andrew, that if that happened in this day and age, and we'd consolidated our place in the Championship, and then only bought one player who was a fullback on the cheap to try and kick on to the next level, I mean, in this day and age, I mean, everyone would be fuming about that.
Oh, without doubt. I mean, everybody loves a transfer saga. But yeah, nowadays you get 4 or 5 transfer sagas at the very least. Whereas back then, again, a bit like when Kelvin's mentioned Irwin and how his requirements on the pitch changed. In the 80s, it was common. I think there was even a couple of seasons when we started without a single new player in the team. Smith particularly, I think, was good at using what he had at his disposal and just adding 1 or 2 as and when needed. Whereas now it's a compulsion almost. Fans in particular love it when a team signs 8 or 9 players. But for me, if you've got the basis of a side there and you just think you need a quality addition like Hardyman, that's probably a better way to go about things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think at the time as well, I think he said later on that obviously Kevin Ball kind of came later, but I think he ended up being instrumental in bringing Kevin Ball to Sunderland.
They were both from Portsmouth, weren't they? So
both at Portsmouth. I think they'd both come through a little bit as young players through at Portsmouth, and because he joined the year after when we'd gone up, But in terms of Paul Hardyman, because, that, like I said, if that had happened now, people would be kind of fuming that we'd only signed a fullback. But Paul Hardyman that season, and cracking penalty taker as well, but he was a cracking fullback during that promotion season, Kelvin.
He was. I liked watching this lad. I thought he had the right combination. He was canny on the ball. He had a goal in him. He took a good penalty. He had a bit of pace. I loved his aggression. He was an aggressive bugger, wasn't he? When he played, and I thought he played for the jersey. He didn't, he would have his bad games, but I never felt lack of effort or anything like that was part of his problem. He was somebody who I felt was out there playing for the team. And he wasn't. He was all right going forward. I quite liked him going forward. He was reasonably popular with the crowd as well. I think we kind of took to him in a sort of quiet sort of way, given that he was a southerner,
Well, Kelvin, you can't say anything there because I'm pretty confident he's from a town in Hampshire called Gosport.
Oh yeah,
and that's where all my in-laws live.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
We'll have to watch.
Islets of excellence down in he's from one of them.
We'll have to watch what we say about these Southerners.
Andrew collecting the brownie points there. Well done, man.
Yeah.
Good. Well done. And but sorry, go on, Kelvin.
I just wanted to say it was more a question. Am I right in thinking that we sold him for more than we paid for him? Is that right?
We did. Because what happened was it was the FA Cup final in 1992.
Yeah.
Now he'd played in every round.
Right.
And then because John Kay got injured before the final, and Martin Crosby had to do a bit of a reshuffle. And in the pod recently, he talked to us about it, and he said it was one of his hardest things he had to do in terms of dropping Paul Hardyman from that, because he went with Gary Hours right back, and he went with Anton Rogan because he thought that he needed more height.
Yeah,
and he went with height in the end for the FA Cup final. And if John Byrne had stuck a chance away in that first half, it might have come off. You never know. But he basically he was done with kind of Martin Crosby in the club after that, after being dropped from the FA Cup final, and he ended up going to Bristol Rovers, and I think he went for about $250,000. So I think he left the club for the amount that John Gregory wanted back in 1989. But he was at the time he was an England under-21 international when he came to us, or he had been, and I think he was in his prime. I think he was about 25 when he signed for the club. And we had, I think we were trying to, I'm trying to think that season in that promotion the season before, but I'm trying to think, I think we might have, been shuffling players around, and I'm thinking Ruben Agbula played a lot that season.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think who else might have played at fullback. Frank Gray, of course. I think he played kind of 40-odd games that season in all competitions. But I think Dennis Smith really wanted that fullback position sorted.
Didn't we, in that season, I mentioned him in a pod a few weeks ago when Martin set a question. I think we even brought in that Alan Hay and played him at left back.
He played one game.
Yeah. So it shows that he was searching all over and he wasn't coming across any solutions.
Yeah. Well, Richard Ord played 35 games that season as well, because I think we had to do a big reshuffle because John Kay was injured a lot in the season before, wasn't it? So he was desperate for a fullback.
Yeah. I saw Hardyman a lot for us, and a bit like's been mentioned in the past. When you're younger, you don't fully appreciate who was a good player or who did what. But Hardyman was always, in my memory, well spoken of and thought of as a good player, an important part of the team. So my memories of him were of him being a good purchase. I'm just amazed we've got this far. Normally we've had the Jackie White sweepstakes and the typical Sunderland sweepstakes. How come none of you have mentioned his penalty taking record? Well, it's the law. It's the law when you're talking about Hardyman.
Talked about it before, and Martin's mentioned many times before that Paul Hardyman's trademark penalty as a left footer was the top left-hand corner, and he used to smash it into that top corner. And I don't know whether it was the Mickey Gray effect in that, just the situation, and the fact that we were playing Newcastle in this huge game at Roker Park, and it was final stages of the game, and he was asked to step up and take a penalty. I mean, that's one of the biggest penalties if we hadn't have won that, our conversation about Paul Hardyman might have been very different today. It's just, and that's how football goes, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a question for you, lads. Is that the most popular missed penalty in Sunderland history?
That's a bit harsh. John Burridge will be in touch with you next week saying what you're playing at.
Well, he was funnily enough, he was knocked into next week, wasn't he, by the follower? And
I still felt it was a harsh sending off.
You went for the ball. Right, brilliant. Well, we'll move on. 16th of June. This is the last one. In 2002, Kevin Kilban and David Connolly, or future Sunderland player David Connolly, had their penalty saved in a penalty shootout as Republic of Ireland were knocked out of the World Cup in South Korea in the second round by Spain. And I think that this was just before we had a huge, big influx of Irish players, which we talked about last time. So we'll move on to June the 17th. And in 1953, Welsh international Ray Daniel signed from Arsenal for 28,000. And I think, Andrew, this was another sign of being the Bank of England club, because he joined from Arsenal in what was then a record transfer fee for a defender.
Yeah, it was a record fee for a defender, and Arsenal were the reigning league champions at the time. So talk about splashing the cash. You're not just throwing money around, you're picking off one of the best players from the winners of Division 1. That's pretty major. It was a lot of money. As Chris says, the club were not scared of throwing money around. Daniel, though, did have a good reputation, and I think at that time suited Sunderland's playing style. He was very skillful on the ball. He was very fast. He wasn't necessarily a big physical defender, but Sunderland were an attacking side back then. We spoke, Kelvin, a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, about how Daniel was eventually replaced by Charlie Hurley, who was more of a presence. I think Daniel was a different defender, very good, but he wasn't going to be throwing his body in the way and out-muscling people. He was all about getting the ball down and starting off attacks.
Yeah. And yeah, so that was another sign of that. And then the next year in 1954, by this point he'd left. He left in 1951, but ex-Sunderland forward Ivor Broadis scored twice for England in a 4-4 draw with Belgium in a World Cup final game in Basel. Now, I was trying to think of this. Now, I'm trying to do this completely off the top of my head with no research whatsoever, because I'm, of course, well prepared. But I was trying to think of even an ex-Sunderland player who maybe was the last one, whether someone has done it since, scored a brace for England, who's been linked with Sunderland. An ex-player even? I doubt it's ever been done since.
There's no obvious ones cropping up, and of course, this is one of those where you'll now have people shouting at their
I hope they do.
Yeah,
because I'm stumped.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Darren Bent getting played for England and Fraser Campbell, but not scoring twice in a game.
No,
I can't. There's nothing, and I'm casting my mind. Some of the other, the Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales. I cannot think.
Maybe Quinn.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're talking across any international country, maybe.
Broadis, if I remember rightly, became a pretty well-respected journalist, and Len Shackleton did the same. Did he score a couple on England duty, or I wouldn't put money on it.
Yeah.
It's certainly not a common thing. We can't exactly rattle off a list of 5, 6, 7 players that have done that.
So anyone later than 1954, so this was, I'm struggling to think. I mean, I was even trying to think, even, for Northern Ireland or someone, Phil Gray might have bagged a couple or something like that in a game against Andorra or something like that. But,
Fletcher? Did Fletcher get a hat-trick against?
Possibly, yeah, that's a good shout.
Again, a minnow. It would have been a minnow.
Yeah.
But I think he might have done it for Scotland. But again, I'm not putting any money on any of these lads. These are guesses.
Yeah. That's it. Well, as they used to say, answers on a postcard, please, and send them in to us, because we're stumped a little bit on that one. And then we move on to 1958. Now, this is another international. So at this point, it's Billy Bingham, and it was 1958, and he played for Northern Ireland in a World Cup finals group playoff game against Czechoslovakia, and that decided who went through the quarter final stage, and Northern Ireland won in a game in Malmö in Sweden, and they won 2-1. But Billy Bingham, it's interesting with Billy Bingham when you read about it, because huge name in the game, absolutely huge, but very rarely does it go, Billy Bingham and linked to Sunderland. He's more often than not linked to, of course, Northern Ireland International, and he was Northern Ireland international manager. He managed them internationally, certainly when I was young, for a long, long time, 13 years in the end, from 1980 to into the early 90s. But he played most of his career at Sunderland, played from 1950 to 1958. But it's a name you don't often hear linked with Sunderland. It was interesting because I was reading again, we signed him from Glentoran for 10,000 in 1950. And when we signed him, so I'm trying to look how old he was. He was only 19 when we signed him. And at the time, the way it was, Kelvin, he continued his shipbuilding apprenticeship in the Sunderland shipyards when he signed for us.
Part of the deal.
Did that happen quite often in terms of having jobs on the side and things?
Obviously, we're in the era of I'm trying to be careful what I say there. It certainly seems to have happened at Sunderland a lot. Anyway, they've, he has your contract and he has a job to go with it,
Can you imagine you stood on the yards on Monday talking to your mate, saying, "Hey, I tell you what, Billy Bingham was absolutely rubbish on Saturday." You turn to your left, and well, that's working alongside you. Come on, mate, I didn't see you lining up for Sunderland on Saturday. Give us a break.
It always makes me think of, it would be an international colleague of Beeb Daniels, Trevor Ford, and I can't remember where I read this story, but he was given a job by one of the directors, Ditchburn, I think. Ditchburn's coaches and cars and stuff. But it seems that all Ford did was once a month went in, picked up a new car and drove it around and aggravated the life out of Len Shackleton, doing wheelies in the car park and stuff, So I don't know whether it would be that kind of arrangement where, he finished his apprenticeship in the shipyards, but he rolled in once or twice a week, I don't know. I'm not saying that was one.
So whilst Bingham's freezing himself on the River Weir, absolutely, shivering with cold. Yeah, Trevor Ford just speeds past in his car, says, it's tough this working lad, isn't it?
Well, interestingly, that first season he came to the club, 50-51, he played 13 games in the top flight and scored 4 goals. And like you said, so he was playing in the top flight, scoring goals, and going to the shipyards the rest of the time. But,
well, you would join him. You would include him in a group of players that were still doing that. I've lost my memory. I've lost the player. I can see him, but I cannot think of his name. And he continued his work. He was a pit plumber and continued to work down the pit. Jackie Stellan, maybe. These lads finished their careers so that they had something to fall back on. Was the old adage? I think.
Well, do you think it went on as well, Kelvin? Because back then there was a bit of a strange thing with how much footballers were paid. Mm-hmm. And was there a thing then when almost with some players, and I'm not making accusations again here, but some players had a second job on paper, but they didn't actually do that job. It was just to get them paid a little bit more so they'd come to the club.
Just to be clear, Chris, that's you saying that, not me.
But allegedly.
I think with senior players, I think with senior players that is fair. But the younger ones, like Bingham, I do think it was a case of I'm going to need a trade or something on my CV so that if I pick up an injury, I'm not on the scrap heap. Because, Kelvin, you're dead right. There was a lot of players who were still apprentice electricians or worked down the pit. They might not have been actually digging out the coal because they're professional footballers, but they're getting other qualifications. It was common.
Yeah. Well, there used to be that old sort of cliche or saying about the Northeast, didn't it? If you shout down any pit shaft, Len Shackleton, Jackie Stellan, and will come up, but actually they're just hiding just below surface, waiting on the call. I don't know. I honestly don't know what the reality of that is. How hard people had to work. Whether at the toil every day was it sort of a part-time arrangement? I don't know.
Well, the famous one, because it went on for a long time, but the famous one was Stuart Pearce at Forest, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He used to advertise in the Forest programme as being an electrician. And it was quite recently where the goalkeeper Mark Crosley was telling that story where Clough caught wind of it and didn't know about it. Yeah. And he brought his wife's iron in. And said, "Oh, I hear you're an electrician or something like that." Yeah. And then if you don't get that fixed by Saturday, you're not playing.
He pressed Pearce into that job with the iron, didn't he?
Oh, well done.
It's taken a while today. You were just warming up, Kelvin. Right, what's next? We moved so during the 17th still, and we're moving in 1974. Because I think this is a big one that, again, doesn't get talked about that much because we talked about a similar one the other week in a different direction. Maybe because that hurts, that's more in the memory. But this one, Andrew, Bobby Moncur signed from Newcastle United for $30,000, and he just captained Newcastle in an FA Cup final. And then, to almost kind of in a weird sort of way, it happened. He was actually a pundit, wasn't he, for ITV, I think, in the World Cup. And I'll let you tell the rest of the story.
Yeah. So let's get this right. He was captain for Newcastle in a cup final. So who does that mean we're about to side? Who was captain in the Carabao Cup? I actually don't know. Was it
Dan
Bruno or maybe? So there you go. You've heard it here first. We're going to have it. We're going to swoop and snatch one of Newcastle's favourites off them. But yeah, he was covering 1974. So what was that? Which World Cup was that? Was that West Germany?
West Germany, yeah.
Yeah. So he was in the TV studios, working as part of the team on that. And it was actually in the studio, live on TV, that he signed on the dotted line to come to Sunderland. So last week we were talking about when our promotion was being discussed by Saint and Greavesy with Ron Atkinson. This time was signing players. Just adds a little extra glamour to the deal.
There was another pundit who caught wind of it though, wasn't there?
Oh, you'll have to give us a clue, Chris. You've caught me out on that one.
I'm reading your piece from 2 years ago, Andrew, and you wrote
That's
about
2 years, Chris. I can't remember what I did 2 days ago.
One of the other ITV analysts was a certain Brian Clough, who was manager of Brighton at the time, and he caught wind of this deal because Bobby Moncur was telling the Brian Moore, the presenter. And Brian Moore thought it would be a genius idea because there was no games that day. That they, as he said, they do the signing live on the TV. But Brian Clough went, "Oh, hang on, I didn't realise you were moving from Newcastle. Do you not fancy signing for Brighton?" But I think, and I do wonder how much that had to do with actually wanting to sign Bobby Moncur, or the fact that he couldn't stand Bob Stokoe.
Yes, very possibly, and by magic. It's all coming back to me now, Chris.
All right.
I've not just dug out the article off the website. You're very right. Clough and Stokoe had a rivalry, to put it mildly, whereas Moncur and Stokoe, both ex-Newcastle players, played golf together. They were good friends. And if you've got the option of signing for a friend in a town that is however many miles down the road, 10 miles down the road, that's a lot more appealing than, packing up and moving to the opposite end of the country, going and playing for Brighton, particularly because Moncur was a Scot. He perhaps feels the Northeast is better for him. But yeah, was Clough genuinely interested, or was that a bit of devilment on his part? Who knows?
Well, let's just for any young'uns who are listening who might not know, the whole history of Stokoe and Clough went back to the day Clough got injured on Boxing Day at Roker Park against Bury, and he went down with his cruciate ligaments, which at that time was pretty much a career killer. And Bob Stokoe stood over him and told him to get up and said he was faking it. And he never forgave him. I remember, I think he turned up, I think he was a pundit at the 73 Cup final, wasn't he? And he desperately didn't want Sunderland to win that.
Yeah. He was one of the pundits who said he couldn't see past Leeds. There was only one. So I'm digressing here, but can you remember if you were watching? You wouldn't be watching on that day. Sorry.
Sorry for being young, Kelvin. I apologize.
No, of all those big name pundits on that day, there was one very notable one. Andrew,
I think you mentioned him earlier.
Oh, did I? I've spilt the beans, haven't I?
It was Irwin's doppelganger, wasn't it?
It was Bobby Charlton. You're dead right. Yeah. Charlton stood almost in isolation that day, and of all the big name pundits on both channels, and said, I think Sunderland might win this. Cloughie, he was a case, wasn't he? He was a case.
But Kelvin, sorry, go on, Andrew.
Sorry, Chris. I was just going to say, you mentioned Clough and the injury and Stokoe's reaction to it being a bit of it was a career killer. If you want to talk about career killers, Bob Moncur, when he first turned up at Roker Park, drove in because he was a big player for Newcastle. He drove in a car that was sponsored and had black and white all over it. So, if you want to talk about potential ruining your career, turning up at Roker Park in a black and white striped car is not your best start. But he got over it eventually.
And as you wrote, Andrew, he was in that Newcastle final, playing alongside Alan Kennedy and Frank Clark, who would go on to play for Sunderland or kind of be in the backroom staff as Frank Clark was. But Kelvin, because I'm staggered by thinking about this in terms of, I remember being out shocked when Bracewell went the other way. Was this not a huge deal that Bobby Moncur had jumped ship from Newcastle?
So I think you'll remember that I lived in a mudblood house. We had Newcastle fans and Sunderland fans all housed under the same roof, and that didn't always. It wasn't always a peaceful house. My dad was a Newcastle fan, and my brother, that's closest in age to me, was a Newcastle fan. It was a bit of a shock given his status with the club, club captain. If you think that the European trophy, the Fairs Cup, his time with Scotland, he had a very, very high profile, Bob Moncur, but I think there was a recognition that his legs were going a bit. His speed was going a bit. Speed was never his best quality. His reading of the game and his timing, and he was quite good on the ball, Bob Moncur, were his biggest assets, I think. But it was a shock, but it wasn't the major shock that it would be to, it wasn't like when Lee Clark signed for us, and it wasn't anything like that. There wasn't a lot of chagrin. I mean, as Sunderland fans, I remember the crack being generally positive about, we've managed to sign him. We've whipped him up from under the nose of Brian Clough. We've whipped him away from Newcastle, But I think the reality was, and remember this is going on at the time, I think there are some players, I've just mentioned that about Cecil Irwin. I don't know whether he might have been tipped the wink by would it be Joe Harvey then, Bobby, I think if you get the chance, find yourself another berth, I don't know whether the reasonably people would do that. I'll tell you one of the things I remember about, I always remember this, it's funny the things you remember. I'm sure when he signed for us, one of the pictures of him in the press was not at all to do with football. Can you remember that? Can you you might have seen it when you've been doing research and stuff like that. He used to sail. And I always remember saying, what the hell's that got to do with me? As a lad, I'm like looking at it thinking, I don't know why have they put that in? As he sailed down from Newcastle, as he come in his boat, never mind the black and white car, and
this brilliant writer, Kelvin, that I've just been reading. Andrew, you put that in your piece, didn't you?
Yeah, that was actually my first memory of Moncur.
Right.
He appeared in a match day program in the 90s. By that point, he'd retired from playing, obviously, and he ran a sailing school. So there's a photo of this bloke stood next to a posh yacht in the program.
Right.
At that stage, I didn't know Bob Moncur had used to play for Sunderland. I might have thought, is this an advert? What's the feature here? Mm-hmm. So it's only when I read about it, I was like, oh, this bloke actually used to play for us. He played for Newcastle, got a good reputation, and had come to Sunderland and done a job. So can't be many players that travelled down to games and turned up to training, just mooring their yacht down at the docks before nipping into training.
I'm trying not to say here that the reason why he moved was he spotted the tide turning.
No. Number 2. People are counting. That's number 2, I think.
Fair play, Kelvin. You a couple of good ones to start with today. Good work.
Right, and it's a nice segue into the next one. I'm not sure how, but I'll go for it. 17th, last one.
Sorry to interrupt you, Chris.
No.
Just about Bob Moncur. He was a good captain. When he came to Sunderland, he gave her really, really good service. I thought he put a good season in and helped us forward. But I know that wouldn't be. I've got a very good friend who's a Sunderland fan, and whenever we talk about Bob Moncur, I always forget how venomous he can be about him, and so I know that wouldn't be necessarily a popular view throughout the whole of the.
I've got a feeling Andrew's going to disagree with you here.
You're right.
No, I'm just being silly. I'm just being silly. I thought when he mentioned captain, this was going to be Kelvin going for the hat trick, and it was some sort of captain of the ship. Do you know what I mean? I thought it was going to be another pun. I do apologise.
Getting on board with the patter here.
Yeah, exactly. So I misread that one.
I was actually making a serious point about it.
Well, there's your problem, Kelvin. Too many jokes in the past.
He moved again, though. If you look at what happens to him as we get promotion, off he goes. He's not gonna. He knows he has. I think he knows he hasn't got the legs for the top division, and
the sea legs,
and off he goes again. His sea legs had gone. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted you there.
No. It's a toss of a coin whether you're cracking a joke or whether you. So the last one on the 17th of June, in 1990, Jordan Henderson was born. Now it's funny because I'm kind of early 40s. I'm not going to say my exact age, but it's funny when you get to that age and this is when you start feeling old that you see a full player's career and then you see them going into management, because obviously when you're young, you grow up with those players and then suddenly they're retired and then the next batch come through and they're retired and then you go, bloody hell, actually. I'm not on a bit at this point. But anyway, let's move on to June the 18th. 1911, John Coleman transferred to Fulham, scored 21 goals and 33 appearances in his only season at Roker Park. You got a little bit about him, Andrew?
Yes, again, I've been reading up. Excellent writer, Chris. I must say, this fella called A. Smithson.
Everyone's got to check him out on the website.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I did a piece on his departure. This Coleman fella is some character. He went by a couple of different names. He was actually quite a good player for us on the pitch, but we got rid. Because I think he was a bit of an agitator. He was involved in player strikes and complaints about the maximum wage for players. But he was doing all sorts of things, like I'm sure he got booked in a game because he was wearing a false moustache or something bizarre like that. He was a very good player, really top quality player, but you saw in his career he would get somewhere and then they would move him out because of these practical jokes. Interesting bloke. I'm just scanning back here. There was a time when he instigated the players all wearing black armbands to kind of signify they were part of a players' union and they were fighting against these wage restrictions. He was an interesting fella.
Good lad. He sounds a right good lad. He's taken the disguised pass a bit too far there, sticking a moustache on.
And moving on, 18th of June again, 1971, Jason McAtee was born in Birkenhead, which of course meant he was a Republic of Ireland international. 1974. So this was the day after Bobby Moncur signed from Newcastle United for 30,000. We signed Brian Pop Robson from West Ham United for 145,000. And this was the first of 3 occasions that he went on to sign for the lads. And he was, of course, in Peter Reid's backroom staff for a long time. And he was well respected as a coach of kind of youth teams and young players and bringing those on. But again, Pop Robson, and again, just looking at another piece from 2023 from this fantastic writer, A. Smithson, on this day, 18th of June, 1974, talking about it. But Pop Robson's one of these players who, again, 3 times and I always talk about being, glad that I saw Paul Bracewell sign for Sunderland. But Pop Robson, name from fans who saw this era, always bring him up, Kelvin.
Yeah, definitely. What a class act. Class act on the pitch. 3 times signed for us, and every time he signed, never let us down on the pitch. A former playing colleague of Bobby Moncur, by the way. When I first saw Pop Robson play, he was playing for Newcastle. I saw him play for Newcastle, both against us, and I used to get taken to Newcastle games by an uncle who was trying to convert me. Well, he wasn't converting me, he was trying to get me to go and support Newcastle. And Robson was playing then, just as a young lad. He was just a young boy. Cracking signing. Came from a signing that came out of the blue. When you're on about transfers now and how much of the scuttle, how much of the gossip we get about transfers, my memory of Robson was he just seemed to land. I never picked up anything about him coming. But when he did land, I know my dad said, "You've got a good player on your hands there, mind," because he kind of went down to West Ham and sort of disappeared off the northeastern radar. I think the world was a little bit bigger then. You didn't know what was going on, and you weren't getting daily reports on former players and what have you. But he just came in, and when we bought Mel Holden a little bit, I'm sure Holden came a little bit later on, and I always thought him and Mel Holden were they were sort of like Phillips and Quinn. Robson had he was a fantastic player at just, he would ghost in. 1 minute there's pressure on the opposition goal. We've got players fighting for the ball and crossing it and all this obvious stuff, and then the ball's in the back of the net. And it's like the first time you realise Robson scored it is when he's walking away with his hand in the air. He was that kind of goal scorer for me. He used to ghost in. He was really clever on his feet as well. He wasn't slow, but he was dead nimble on his feet. But his father-in-law's, I remember, was he used to train the come dancing dancers, and he used to do a bit of training with his father-in-law. His father-in-law was a guy called Len Heppel, I think, and a number of players benefited from going to see Len Heppel over the years. He would give them stuff which would help with balance and stuff like that. Ian Porterfield being one of them. Yeah.
Len Heppel, I believe, ran a nightclub as well. Mm-hmm. So I wonder how many of the players were telling their wives, "Oh yeah, I'm just off to see Len Heppel," making out that it's a bit of footwork that they're doing. But
allegedly, Andrew. Allegedly,
again, allegedly, yes.
That nightclub wasn't at the back of Jackie White's, was it? Back to Brian Pop Robson.
Yeah. Just in case, Andrew, that deal. Obviously, you wrote about it, but apparently we were trying to get Brian Kidd at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Brian Kidd, again, somebody who, when he first came to my attention, was a assistant manager at Man United, So in my eyes, I thought he was just an old name. I didn't know anything about him. It's only in later years that I realised he was quite some talent. He was a very exciting prospect. Sunderland were very keen on getting him. I must admit though, Chris, all of these memory tests for me now, I might have wrote about them a couple of years ago. I can't remember the details. I'm
trying to remember who the link was with Brian Kidd. There was somebody that he knew really well at the club. I just cannot remember who it was that he knew for some reason. But it's
a
gone.
Former teammate or something, was it?
I think so. I think so, Andrew. But that'll come to me as soon as we're finished. I'll go. That was what the link was. Yeah,
he was a really talented player. So the desire to get him in makes a lot of sense. I mean, somebody told me that Brian Kidd, he was the GOAT. He was a good player. And I'm now looking at two blank faces there who just haven't got my joke. And this is painful, lads.
I was looking through the squads. I was trying to look through the squad to see if I could prompt Kelvin, but
no, he was a very good player long before he became a coach at Man United. When I remember him, he was a quality player. That obviously fell through. We've got Robson, but that's not a bad backup option. Brian Robson was a brilliant player for us, and like we were saying about Paul Bracewell last week. He's come back a lot of times, not just as a player, but I remember him as a coach. I remember him having a stint as a scout. He's a Sunderland lad originally, and he's come back a few times to the club.
Pretty sure Peter Reid got him to come back from Man United. I think he was at Manchester United under Ferguson. He was in his backroom staff, and Peter Reid talked him into coming from there. But I love hearing about Pop Robson. But we'll try and move on because we've still got a couple of absolute corkers we need to get through. So the last one on the 18th of June, we've got Simon Ramsden, fullback, player with the shortest Sunderland career in minutes, I think. And he signed for Grimsby Town after being released by the club. We'll move on to the 19th of June. We've got Billy Bingham, again, first player to appear in a World Cup quarter-final. And then I'm not sure but answers on a postcard. We'll not go too much into that, but I would imagine Asamoah Gyan might be the next one. Maybe. But anyway, that's one for people to send in to us. We talked about this last time. Sunderland signed centre-half Jeff Clark from Manchester City for 100,000 in the deal that took Dave Watson in the other direction, I think it was. And I actually played with alongside Jeff Clark's son at Sunday League for a while, and I played against him at school level, and he was a cracking player. Went on to have a really good career in the lower leagues, and he was a really, really good lad as well. Good player. 1983, Nick Pickering made his only England appearance in a 1-1 draw with Australia in Melbourne, and we could talk all day about Nick Pickering, but as I said, we've got a couple of crackers to get through. 1998, on June the 19th, Sunderland City Council bought the medal collection of the late Rich Carter for 30,000 on the day before it was due to be auctioned at Christie's in Glasgow, which was brilliant. And actually, it's funny because I take that route out of Sunderland when I leave and come back down south with my son in the car. And I just think it's fantastic that, because he asks the question when we drive through towards Seaham and towards the A19 through Silksworth, that, that you're driving those roads, not Silksworth, towards Seaham, through town towards the A19. And you've got all the links with Rich Carter there. You've got the names of the sports centres. You've got his mural on the wall. And he always asks questions, so I end up talking about him. And it's just a fantastic, I just think it's brilliant that we've got those things around the place that, kids kind of grow up and ask questions and get into the history of the club. I think it's brilliant. Moving on to June the 20th, and we've got a cracking one about Arthur Brown, which we'll come back to the early 1900s. And we'll come back to that one in a second. 1956, we've got birth of Peter Reid. No explanation who that is. 1964, we've got the birth of Alec Chamberlain. 1968, we've got the death of James Cowan, and we talked about him on a previous episode. Let's move into the 21st. We've got the death of Edwardian era Irish international defender David McConnell. 1997, we'll spend a few minutes on this, but we've got the auction at Roker Park artifacts at the ground. And I remember actually, I'm sure Bob Murray and John Ficklin told us in a podcast that one of the best decisions they made was before the Everton and Liverpool games, taking all of the memorabilia down off the walls and from turnstiles and things like that. If you remember, they had makeshift signage over all of the turnstiles, and anything that moved, they took and put into storage because they knew it was going to go missing after those games. But I remember that period beforehand when people could look around, and people could just wander into Roker Park and go in there. You could go anywhere you wanted and have a wander around. I remember me and a few of the lads went, and we just started walking around the dressing rooms, and I'd never been in those places before. And I got a chance to walk in the boardroom and take a look, and a few lads had a ball on the pitch, so we ran home and grabbed a ball, and we started having a kickabout on the pitch. A lot of the goals had been taken down, and there was a bit cordoned off to take the pitch up. But I don't know, Andrew, if you had any memories of that.
Similar to you, Chris, on the day of the auction, me and my mates were down. That was the only time I ever got on the pitch at Roker Park. When you went with school, you were allowed on the pitch, but the day we went, there was a reserve team game, so the groundsman was like, I'm not having a load of kids on the pitch. So I had to wait until the place was getting sold before I could go. But it was a brilliant day. Like you, me and my mates were going in all the admin rooms and opening cupboards up and desk drawers and just
bizarre, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was fantastic going to all these places, and yet the day of the auction I'll always remember is the day I finally got on the pitch at Roker Park and got to play. It was brilliant. Do you know what, Chris? You and me might have been on opposite sides or something playing.
You might have given us the idea about bringing a footy along.
Yeah. It was a horrible time leaving Roker Park. I really did find it tough, but around the auction was brilliant, and I bought some absolute rubbish. You know, just me mum and dad. You know, I've come home. Oh, I've bought this. Where we're going to put this, you know? I've got lumps of Fulwell End terrace I think somebody just took a pick to the terracing and was like knocking out chunks of concrete, so grabbed some of that. Oh, mad. Yeah. I remember the old scoreboard in the corner between the clock stand and the Roker end where you put the boards in for half time.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've got to use the term scoreboard loosely.
Yes. They were selling bits of that off, and I remember being sorely tempted, and I thought, if I turn up at home telling me dad, you're going to have to hire a trailer here. I've bought I don't know, what was it, 20, 30 foot corrugated iron shed that we're going to get in the backyard. I don't think I would have been too popular with that one. It went for a song. I think it would have been worth more if you just sold it as scrap metal. But
brilliant stuff. That old scoreboard. But yeah, absolutely brilliant. And moving on, 21st of June as well, 2002, Claudio Reyna. His World Cup ended as USA were knocked out by Germany in the quarterfinal in South Korea. 2004, Dean Whitehead was signed from Oxford United, which was a brilliant signing from Mick McCarthy. June the 22nd, we've got the birth of defender Colin Waldron in Manchester. And then we've got Martin Harvey, who played for Northern Ireland in their 4-1 friendly victory over Mexico in Belfast. I mean, Kelvin, you were really wanted to speak about this fella, and I mean, again, one of these names who you hear up with the Ashursts, the Hurleys, and things like that, but he seems to always be just on that rung slightly below.
Yeah, Yeah. Well, you're right, Chris, in the sense of my feeling about Martin Harvey was always under the radar. Never one of the first players that people would speak about. But when you talk to people that saw him play and saw him play lots, he's not under the radar. People knew what sort of player he was. He I mean, I'm really indulging myself here talking about him.
You go for it.
Totally indulging myself because he became just a bit of an ever present in my first sort of 6 years. I first went to 66 in 1966, and he was playing that day and was playing right half that day, and I saw his last game, and it was tragic. I'd been taken down to. I sound like I was a young Ben. I wasn't. I was a teenager by that point, but I'd managed to get a lift down to Norwich for a game against Norwich, and we were just on the threshold. We were just bubbling under the promotion picture. And Martin Harvey was playing that day, and he actually scored. Norwich got promotion that year, 1972, 71, 72. Norwich went up. They won the league, and we went down there, and there was a lot of Sunderland fans down there for that game in 72, and he scored a cracking goal. It was like a Pop Robson goal in the box. He swiveled and hammered the ball into the back of the net from about 2 yards out. But it was a cracking goal. So he brought us level, and then in trying to preserve the point, he reached for a ball. The ball was heading in. I'm not going to say he wasn't that far off the goal line, and reached for a ball and stopped it, but injured his knee and his back. He did a desperate two double really serious injuries, and it looked that on the, how sometimes you say, oh, he got injured, but he kind of walked off and never thought nothing of it, and it's finished him. Way this one, it looked like he really, really hurt himself, and I remember the Norwich crowd giving him a good clap as he went off as well. There wasn't any booing and accusations of time wasting going on. It looked a bad injury. But from 1966 to 72, he just always seemed to be there. And do you know what? I always say this about Martin Harvey. He had this frustrating habit of always passing to his own players and, and producing these 8 out of 10 performances week after week after week. He was just that kind of player. A real, and because he was always there when I was a kid, you then follow up by doing a bit of research and finding out what kind of fella he was, so there's plenty of stuff, there's plenty of stats and stories about what kind of player he was. But what you always get with Martin Harvey is somewhere in that feedback, somebody will say what a lovely bloke he was as well. What a really, really nice character he was. And that comes from lots of different, from colleagues, from players that he coached, from managers. He was just a real dependable character, and he seems to have been a really, really nice character.
Kelvin, just quickly, I was just looking at his appearances there. It seemed like his breakthrough season was that promotion year.
He signed for us. He had an interesting sort of period before he signed for us. He went to Burnley on trial, and because he was only 5'3" then, and this was, I think it was 1955, he goes to Burnley for a trial. He's 5'3", and they send him back and say he's not big enough. And they send him back to Belfast, where he signs for the same boys' club that George Best came out of, he was a Belfast boy, and he signs for Boyland Boys Club, and he gets noticed there by our Northern Irish scout, who's a guy called Tommy Coulter, spots him in 1957, and back he comes to Sunderland for a trial, and Alan Brown signs him straight away. He doesn't waste any time with apprenticeship or anything like that. By this point, and believe it or not, in 2 years, Martin Harvey's grown 6 inches. So he's 5'9", and signs for us. He pretty quickly makes his debut. He's a right half. He comes in ostensibly as Stan Anderson's understudy, and Anderson goes to play for England in October '59, and in steps Harvey for his debut. And Argus in the Echo, found a nice, because Argus, you lads will probably know him better than me. Argus writing in the Echo, he could be absolutely savage. He wasn't what you would call, he didn't hang about on the fence, Argus. If you were good, you were good. If you weren't, you were savage, And he said, of his debut, he says, Harvey promises to develop into a wing half of the finest class. You would take that from Argus on your debut. And he's just 18 years old. But, oh my goodness, it takes him a long time to establish himself in the team. That's 1959. He plays something like 20 games in 2.5 years, because Stan Anderson is such a good player, so key to the team. He's at the height of his powers, and Harvey's just in the background there. Harvey himself says, you learned a hell of a lot from watching Anderson play, but he does go on to play 353 games, 5 goals between 1959 and 72. His breakthrough was, I don't know if, when you look at the stats, just the season before, he gets 14 games towards the end of the season. And what happens is, I think Anderson has a little dip in form, and Harvey comes in, and he basically plays so well that Alan Brown cannot drop him. And Anderson, and there's a great bit. Stan Anderson was the source of how much did he write himself? I don't know. He got a bit of help to write, Captain of the North, which is a great book by Stan Anderson. He played for Sunderland, Newcastle, and Middlesbrough, and captained them all. So he was a fine player. And he says in his book, he says that Martin Harvey's he's a young player of some prospect, and he'd no chagrin about Harvey usurping him. His chagrin, his difficulties was about the way it was done. And I am digressing here a little bit. That was done on a team sheet that was pinned to the dressing room wall, and Harvey would take the place of right half Stan Anderson, but Stan Anderson has to go down to Plymouth, because it was Plymouth that they were playing when this happened. He's fit to play, but Harvey gets the right half berth, and Anderson's named as travelling sub. Obviously, there's no subs officially then, but they always took an extra player or two to away games in case somebody got injured. And he's told he has to travel all the way down to Plymouth, and he hang on a minute, I'm not doing that. Knee problem with being dropped, but I'm no jumping on the bus and going all the way down to Plymouth. But he rates, Anderson himself rates Harvey and says you can see that he's going to be a good player. So he did a terribly slow start as the backup to Anderson, but when he does get in, he stays. He comes in and he stays. And the reason why Anderson why Brown thinks he can sell Anderson to Newcastle. Anderson puts 2 transfer requests in over this sort of period, and the first one's denied, but then the second one, Brown's had a good look at Harvey and said, we'll sell you, we'll sell you because I've got a young lad coming in that's got 10 years in front of him in that position. So Anderson goes to Newcastle, and Harvey takes his chance.
Yeah, well, you were talking about selling Anderson, but once he established himself and had a few years under his belt, I was reading that we actually agreed to sell him to Aston Villa for 25,000 in 1967, but he knocked it back.
He spoke to Norwich as well. Norwich and Aston Villa agreed to pay the asking price, and I don't know. I honestly don't know whether he got a whisper that McCall wasn't going to last much longer, because what he was suffering with there was the McCall era and the McCall regime, but he spoke to both clubs. He went and spoke to them both, and he didn't sign for either of them.
When he eventually did stop playing in 72, as you've touched on there, I wonder if the timing of that is one of the reasons why he isn't spoken about as often as some other players. Because, Kelvin, you've gone through it there. He was clearly a brilliant player for us. But I think, unfortunately, if you leave Sunderland in 1972, the big story comes along the next year, and you've kind of just missed the boat, haven't you?
Yeah, well, and I was going to say, just in terms of that kind of, if you look at the trio you talked about, Kelvin, and again, linked to that conversation you talked about, Andrew, but that, you've got Harvey, Hurley and McNabb in that conversation.
Great.
But if that's the conversation, he's kind of struggling, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, it had been Anderson, Hurley and McNabb, and then it was Harvey, Hurley and McNabb. And when I started going, that was generally what you expected to see. It was just the hinge of the team. And talking to lads, the 63-64 team, they were the hinge of not just the defence but the attack as well. Charlie Hurley had attack in him, offensive play in him, good offensive play. We spoke about that a few weeks ago. Martin Harvey, very, very subtle player with the ball at his feet, good passer of the ball, not averse to a wee charge forward himself. He was and a great long passer of the ball. One of my memories of watching him play, how he came to my attention, 2 things as a young lad that sort of drew me into him a little bit, bearing in mind that by this point I've got Jim Baxter, Gallasleaf going around the pitch and me just imagining myself as Jim, and then every so often Charlie Hurley charging up and scaring the living daylights out of in the boys' enclosure, So I've got these 2 larger than life characters. But over the piece of watching him, Martin Harvey, he just seemed to have this ability of always passing to his own player, short or long. He had this great long pass as well. And one of the things that, as a young lad, I hadn't realised it. It was something by the time he finished playing for us, I knew all about that. He was a left footer that played on the right hand side. And one of the reasons he liked to play there was he could swing these. He could get the ball under control and swing these long passes out to the opposite side of the pitch, So that was something. He wasn't completely one-footed, because that was the other thing about him watching him play. As you started watching these lads week in, week out, he always seemed to have the ball under control. It didn't matter how it come to him, right or left foot, he'd bring the ball down. Different to Charlie Hurley, whose big limbs were involved in all that, but Hurley always looked elegant. You know, likewise at 5'9", Harvey, he always seemed to have the ball under control. You know, he was quick over the ground as well. The one as a laddie, one of the things I always remember this. Is a laddie watching him play, and you know how when you're a young lad and a player does something, and you think, oh, I'm going to do that, you know, and now I'm going to. And he had this, so it was kind of a slide tackle that he used to do, and it was quite clever. I never felt like, you know, my mind might be playing tricks on us here, but he wasn't like a thunderous tackler. You know, what he seemed to do was dispossess players with hardly, he was like Alan Hansen, you know, he just used to, the ball was away, and sometimes the players were like trotting on 2 or 3 steps and thinking, where's the bloody ball gone, you know? And he had this sort of slide tackle where he almost let the player turn him, and he would slide in and hook the ball away from them. But he didn't just do that. What he was really quick at was then getting up on his feet and moving away with the ball. And I like the look of this as a young lad. I'm like looking at that and thinking, I can do that. And I spent weeks and weeks and weeks on the backfield, you know, doing it. And I got really good at it. So when we were having games at school and having games on the, you know, we called our back pitch Wembley like everybody else, you know, and the clarty bit of grass. And I got really good at it. But I started aggravating the life out of all my mates and my brothers, because every time I did it, I shouted, Harvey! And, you know, I took a couple of wallops for doing that to like older lads, you know.
I always remember on that topic the Colombian keeper Aguita. Did that scorpion kick, and that was so bad. That was so bad that everyone at school was trying it, and the school had to send a message to tell kids to stop doing it because so many were crashing against the floor and getting hurt. But just in terms of Harvey, and just looking at it, kind of the notes and everything, Kelvin. But he was the last remaining player from that promotion team.
Yeah, he was the last outfield player from that promotion team to be playing, but still playing well. This was a lad that looked after himself. We're talking about Davy Watson last week, and you know he looked after himself. He was still playing well. In 1972, he was a big part of that team, and you couldn't have imagined him going anywhere. If you were into looking at stats and appearance stats, he would have easily passed the 400 mark. He was fit, he was quick, he was he'd adapted his game really well, and he was an integral part of the team. I do sometimes think, I mentioned when we're talking about David Watson last week about regretting never seeing Todd and Watson play defensively together. I would have liked to have seen Martin Harvey and Davy Watson play together in defence. Nothing against Richie Pitt, and I mean Martin Harvey played a lot of games in central defence with Richie Pitt. Harvey, you know, he was one of the players that was able to embrace that change from 2-3-5 to 4-4-2. He was, and I wish I tried looking for who it was where I'd read this, but I couldn't find it. I should write this stuff down when I read it, but I can remember what they said, but I can't remember who said it. And it was something like Harvey was a pioneer of that change from 2-3-5 to 4-4-2. He just had the ability and the intelligence to be able to adapt his game and play that position. So by the time we get to 1972, he's an integral part of the team. He doesn't get that injury against Norwich, and we'll go into 72, 73, coming back to your point, Andrew. we go into 72, 73 with Martin Harvey as the hinge and Davy Watson as centre half, but we never really got the chance to see that at play too much. He suffered a bit, like a number of players. The McCall era saw him. If you look at he still plays, comparatively speaking, a lot of games, but it's his adaptability that gets him games. He spends quite a bit of time. Right half is his stated position. But he plays a lot of games at left back. He's left-footed primarily, remember. Plays a lot of games at left back. Ian McCall had some difficulties with Len Ashurst. That wasn't just about football. I think Ashurst kind of had McCall's number, and so he struggled sometimes. And McCall kept trying to buy players and bring players in to replace Ashurst, but Ashurst, the kind of character he was, he just stuck in at training, stuck in when he got his chance on the pitch, and sort of saw them all away just about. But he plays a lot of games at left back and plays them well. He plays at right half, and then as 4-4-2 comes in, he's backing up the centre half, and playing really well there.
Just out of interest, Kelvin, what if he doesn't get that injury? What impact does that have on that 73 Cup winning side?
I don't know that. Richie Pitt was on his way to Arsenal. Pitt, fantastic in that cup run. Harvey and Pitt played a lot of games together in the late 60s when Pitt was coming through. Nothing wrong with Richie Pitt. Good centre half, what you might call a traditional centre half, and that was his position. That was Pitt's position. But I would have said to you that Watson and Harvey would have probably been the central defensive hinge for that team. That would have been my educated guess, that Watson and Harvey would have played there. I would have said to you, Bobby Moncur probably wouldn't have needed to sign Bobby Moncur, because Harvey was every bit as good a player as Bobby Moncur, in my opinion. And he played a similar role to Moncur, except he'd probably be quicker across the ground than Moncur even then.
And when we're talking about lots of Sunderland links when it comes to his coaching career, because he ended up at Plymouth as assistant to Bobby Moncur in the early 80s, and then he was assistant to Billy Bingham as well for Northern Ireland. We already mentioned Billy Bingham with Northern Ireland, and then I think when I think it was it a Carlisle, or I can't remember. He took over somewhere in the early 80s.
He went with Bob Moncur to Carlisle. There is an important bit of his coaching career was, when he got the injury and he wasn't coming back, he was part of Bob Stokoe's coaching team. Yeah, if you look at some of your 1973 FA Cup final vids and that, you'll see Harvey dotting around, and he was part of the coaching team there, with Arthur Cox and Harvey, held in very high esteem by the players. I think he would obviously be a good link with the players, because he'd been one of them, and he was an intelligent lad. He was a personable character as well. He wasn't somebody that people felt they couldn't trust. I think he was kind of a stand-up individual in that regard. So he was part of the 72-73 coaching team. He's there as a coach through to 75-76, and then off he goes. Bob Moncur takes him to Carlisle, I think, where he's Bobby Monker's number 2. They do quite well there, and then Moncur suddenly leaves, goes to Hearts, and Harvey takes the helm of the ship. But it doesn't go that well for him. I'll tell you who was there at the time of that. Young Jimmy Hamilton, Chico Hamilton, was there and played some of his best football at Carlisle. And he says, Martin Harvey, what a great bloke and what a great coach. And he said, I played some of my best football at Carlisle when, and they moved him back. You see, I think he credit Harvey, I think, with saying, let's get you back in midfield. So rather than pushing him up as a winger or a forward, he gets him back in the midfield, and he plays, Hamilton says he plays some of his best stuff. But his recollection of that was there wasn't a lot of money around, and also Carlisle, believe it or not, when you're thinking about circles and links, wanted Bob Stokoe by this time to come in. So Stokoe's resigned from Sunderland, gathered himself a little bit, and decides he's going to go. Yeah. He's going to go to Carlisle, and Harvey leaves and goes to Plymouth with Bobby Moncur.
No longer with us, unfortunately. Passed away in 2019 at the age of 78. But I was just trying to look, Kelvin, because I'm not sure whether it was completely the done thing, but he was here for 12, 13 years, and I remember Jim McNabb had a kind of delayed testimonial. Was it the early 2000s? Because I remember Marco Gabardini scoring a corker in it. At the Stadium of Light. I mean, I don't know how often players had testimonials and things like that. Did he get one?
He did. I want to say it in 1975-ish, and it was against Newcastle. And my recollection is there was a canny turnout for that. I wasn't at it, and I can't even remember where I was. But that's why I remember it. I was a bit hacked off because I couldn't go. Yeah. So I'm going to say to you around about 1975, and he gets a testimonial.
I've just looked at Kelvin. It was the 28th of April, 1975, against Newcastle, and we won 3-2. But I don't think that was important. But just over 13,500. Turned up in April 1975. So there you go.
Yeah, he was. I love his coaching. I remember him as a player and as a really, really good player. But his coaching credentials, the number of players when you start doing a little bit of research, the number of players and managers who rate him as a coach. He's worked with I don't know if you can remember this, but when that Northern Ireland team in 1982 was it? That Northern Ireland team with that had Norman Whiteside and Jerry Armstrong and them boys in it, and Billy Bingham, the ex-Sunderland boss, bought him in as his number 2 for Northern Ireland, and he did 2 World Cups with Bingham, and Northern Ireland broke out of the group. They got through the group stages and into the knockout games. It was really exciting. The Northern Irish team were great to watch, and they're on the bench. If the camera shuttled one up from Billy Bingham, there's Martin Harvey sitting on the bench. He's essential to the Bingham. Rated him and really credited him with a lot of the success of that team. Jerry Armstrong, who he scored an iconic goal for Northern Ireland in that World Cup run. He says some lovely things about Harvey, both as a coach. He's very, very happy memories of Harvey, both as a coach and a person during that time. Very exciting young Northern Irish team as well. Armstrong, Norman Whiteside, Martin O'Neill. Wow. There's some great Sunderland links in that team that comes through at that time. So his credentials as a coach were pretty high. Jimmy Nicholl was in that team. And Jimmy Nicholl, by 1990, Jimmy Nicholl takes the job as Raith Rovers manager.
Yeah.
And he's a fledgling manager, but has the sense to realise he needs an older head beside him. And he'd really enjoyed working with Harvey in the World Cup squad. So he asks Harvey to come and be his number 2 at Raith Rovers. Now, Raith Rovers, I'm up in Scotland at the time, and I've got my eye on some of this. I always like to watch Raith Rovers because two of my favourite players came out of Raith Rovers. You got Baxter and Ian Porterfield came out of Raith Rovers. But I mean, it's not the centre of the universe, Starks Park, But they have had their successes with individual players. So he goes as number 2. And I'm thinking, wow, this is, how hard's that going to be? I mean, Raith had done now, and Celtic and Rangers, Hearts and Hibs are the team. Raith were in what was then the old Scottish First Division. And your boys out, do they not galvanise that team? And they win 2 First Division titles, and they win Raith's first ever major trophy. They beat Celtic in the League Cup final. And it's a bit like, if I gave you an analogy of Hartlepool, Hartlepool beating Arsenal. That's what it was like. That's what it felt like. I had a mate that was a Raith season ticket holder, believe it or not, and he was past himself at the time. He said, he rang us up one day, he says, I'll not be into work today. I said, what's up with you? He says, I'm feeling too well. I was his boss, and I'm like, get your bloody arse into work, you out, and you can come and talk to me about your football team, but get your arse into work, I'm feeling too well, so it was very exciting, but both Jimmy Nicholl and fans credit Harvey with a key role in all that.
Yeah.
He retires to Devon. He seems to be, he's at Plymouth for a good while. He has I think he puts about 5 years in total in with Plymouth, and then retires to Devon. And I think it was about 1997 where he retires to the Devon countryside, and off he goes. So a very, very subtle and, successful coaching career that he had.
Just quickly, just looking at his testimonial, Tom Finney was on the bench for Sunderland for that testimonial, which was quite surprised.
So fellow Northern Irish international, Finney never played. He didn't play in Harvey's era, but Finney, fellow Northern Irish international. As a Sunderland player, Martin Harvey still at the moment has the record for international caps as a Sunderland player, but he's got somebody coming right up on his on the tram lines about to take him over, and that's Dan Ballard. And I'm not talking about just Northern Irish internationals, but Dan Ballard's got, I think, 30 caps and is heading for the 34, and he'll probably get them, won't he? As will Try Hume, I think he's at 21, 22 or something at the moment. So they're coming up on the blind side and probably going to surpass his record in terms of Sunderland players and their international caps. Yeah.
And so that's I was going to mention something else about Martin Harvey, but I'm not sure there's anything else to mention about him, but I'm sure there was.
Sorry.
there was one more thing. I think that was me looking at that testimonial side, because I think I've obviously just getting you've put me right there on the Tom Finney being the Northern Irish one, because I thought it was a bit strange being the England international. I was going to say, but But yeah, and yeah, well, we've got to kind of mention that I suppose the elephant in the room, because I was telling you lads that my mum used to date Martin Harvey before before she got with my dad. So that's the story anyway, and I'm sticking to it. But yeah, brilliant. And I hadn't realised he kind of had that coaching career, so that was really interesting that he was a coach.
Honestly, the amount of people that you speak to, the old worthies on the bus that chunter on, and I thought I'll go and pick their brains about his coaching career, and they were looking at me like, I knew that he went to a Bobby Moncur to Carlisle, but I didn't realise he'd done all that, And I mean, obviously around for the Northern Ireland's World Cup exploits.
Well, I was just going to say there's a good story that reminded us of him in Al Quinn's book, where he said he took a couple of young lads out to a pub when he was at Sunderland, and it was a couple of young Irish lads. I think it might have been Cliff Byrne, Brendan McGill maybe, and I think it was Kevin Kyle, and he took them to the pub, and then he invited one of his mates along, and he said to these three lads, he was like, he asked the question, he went, who was the second youngest player to ever play at a World Cup? And there was this other fella there, and these three lads, Kyle, McGill and Byrne or something, were looking at each other blankly going, well, was it this fella here? And the fella went, no, it wasn't. It was Pele. The youngest player to ever play was me. And it was Norman Whiteside. They didn't even know who he was.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, I remember that. It was really exciting watching that Northern Ireland team. And, I think the whole of the UK was rooting for them. There wasn't any of this stupid, rivalry. That everybody swung in behind them at little Northern Ireland and was rooting for them to do well. When he got his debut cap for Northern Ireland, Martin Harvey had only played like 10 games for Sunderland. He was 19 when he got his cap for Northern Ireland, so he'd been playing for Northern Ireland for a long time as well. Yeah. Ian Lothar played with him that day when he made his debut for Northern Ireland. He played quite a few games with Johnny Crossan and John Park, who I was talking about before. He played a few games with them too. I think the three of them were only on the pitch together only twice. Did we have three Sunderland players on the pitch? It's interesting looking at the stats on Sunderland and Northern Ireland, isn't it? Have you got Northern Irish players in your heads that as we've been speaking there?
I mentioned earlier, Phil Gray was always the one when I was young, because I remember BBC Sports Night during the week, they used to always do an international roundup, and Phil Gray was usually the one in the early 90s, and so it was and then you had Melville at Wales, but it was always those countries where we had internationals. Remember Phil Gray, there might have been another Northern Irish striker, I can't remember now, but obviously was it Paddy McNair?
Paddy McNair played. David Healy,
David Healy, that's
right. You're thinking of.
Yeah, because he scored against England, the winner against England, didn't he?
Yeah.
Was it Sven or Capello? One of them do.
Yeah.
When Northern Ireland beat England.
Chris, you could have qualified for Northern Ireland if things had panned out differently with your mum. We could have been talking about you instead.
Right, moving swiftly on. Right, I didn't
think the comment was that bad, Chris. I didn't.
Well, it's I'm going to leave it there. Last one on 22nd. Oh, well, we've got two more on 22nd of June. Very quickly. I think Martin touched on it last time with Maradona's goals against England in the 86 World Cup with Sunderland connections. You obviously had Terry Butcher. Peter Reid couldn't keep up with Maradona. He gave it up. And then Terry Fenwick from Seaham came sliding in. Then you've got Terry Butcher. You also had Waddle in that team as well. And then Maradona did the Hand of God goal as well, which I imagine it's one of Kelvin's favourite football memories. But we'll move quickly on.
Never touched his hand.
No, absolutely.
Yipping every day.
Absolutely. Lots of Sunderland links in there. And 2005, we'll go on to Andrew, and this brings us to your quiz question.
Yes. 2005, June the 22nd, we signed a player, and the clues I'd given last week was that he was from County Durham originally. He'd played for Hartlepool United. He moved out of the area, and the club he left to join us on the 22nd of June was the one he then went back to, if that makes sense, when he left us 2 years later, and that was Shotton Colliery's Tommy Miller. So he signed for us on this week all those years ago.
He did, and we did a podcast with him a while back, and he was, talking about how disappointed he was that it kind of didn't work out for, as you said, from Shotton, local lad, and coming back up. But on paper, this was a fantastic signing on paper. Local lad, he'd done well at Ipswich. He'd done well in a good Ipswich side that finished up there in the top half of the Premier League with us. Good central midfielder for Ipswich, ended up taking Ipswich into Europe. And we getting him on a free transfer. And actually, I think at the time, and I'm trying to look back, but there were, and actually I'm just trying to look it up now, but Celtic were chasing him, Leeds were chasing him. I'm sure there was a couple of other clubs. I'm sure Villa were involved in it. But and he ended up choosing us because I don't think we would have been favourites if he wasn't from Sunderland.
No, and you're right. He was a good player, well thought of. Lots of clubs liked the look of him because he was that thing teams need. He was a midfielder who could pop up with goals. At the time, we've mentioned before, McCarthy was having to try and build a squad on a shoestring. So to get a player of Miller's quality on a free was brilliant. I think had things been different and he'd been playing in a team that wasn't struggling at the bottom, we might have seen more from him. He did score a couple of decent goals for us, but it never really worked out. People I think had higher hopes for him. One thing I will say in Miller's defence, and I think spoke volumes about him, was, do you remember that game against Barnsley in March 2007, I think it was, when the players missed the bus? Who was it? It was Stokes, the winger, Swedish winger maybe, Tobias Hussein. Yeah. There was a couple of players missed the bus. Keane said, right,
just like Martin for today's pod.
Well, yes, that's why I've mentioned it. I could see in the future. That he was going to drop out on us. So that's why I set the Tommy Miller question. But yeah, Roy Keane said, right, I'm teaching you a lesson. You're late for the bus. We're away. You're being left behind. That left a spot on the bench for Tommy Miller. He'd been out of the picture for months. I think he'd been away on loan. But Keane
went to Preston, didn't he?
Yes, that's right. Keane said, listen, we've got a lad here who's kept his nose clean. He's worked hard behind the scenes. He's turned up on time. I'm going to give him a place on the bench. And he came on in that game. So you've got to give him credit for that. It didn't work out how he wanted to at Sunderland, but he didn't throw his toys out the pram. He got on with it, he worked hard, and he did get that little bonus, if you like, of getting a few minutes on the pitch in what was a great game for us.
He was another lad, wasn't he? I hadn't actually realised for my sins that he was a local lad.
Yeah.
How he'd come to my attention was just his games for Ipswich. And he was one of these lads, you probably do the same. You see a boy playing against you and you think, boy, he would go down well with us, he's and I thought for a couple of years when he was at Ipswich, what a lovely blooming player he was, I loved, as you say, the goal scoring from midfield. He was a very canny sort of goal scorer in that regard, and creator. He created a lot of stuff. So I was chuffed to bits when we got him. And I thought, wow.
Just on that, Kelvin, because that goal against Middlesbrough, which was our first high point of the season when we won at the Riverside, Julio's free kick. But the other goal was pretty much what we signed Tommy Miller to do. He got beyond, I think it was Stead who flicked it on or something. It was a long ball forward, and he basically ran beyond the striker and scored a brilliant goal. And you thought, oh, actually, that he's on his way.
Yeah.
Was that the goal at Portsmouth I'm thinking of that you've mentioned there?
No, it was the opening day of the season. Not opening day of the season. I think it was, unfortunately, our first victory of the season. And I'm trying to.
He scored against Middlesbrough, didn't he?
Yeah, it was the first win of the season. So we kind of lost the first. Lost the first 5. Then we drew against West Brom, and then we played Middlesbrough away. And second minute, Tommy Miller actually put us ahead. And then it was Julio Walker after the hour scored that free kick where he just chipped it over the wall. But that's what we bought him to play. And I mean, it took like 6 or 7 games, but that was the first flash we'd seen of him. But you touched on it a little bit, Andrew, that the thing that surprised me was even because not one player excelled in that side that got relegated that year. But then the season after, I found it really strange. I thought, oh, well, Tommy Miller back down in the Championship, he's going to be brilliant this year. And it never happened.
No, it didn't. He went out on loan. I think the reason I'm getting confused is he did score away at Portsmouth in the Premier League, and I think again it was a hint of what we thought we were going to get. That was towards the end of the season. He popped up and he's put the goal away. But yeah, you're right. Back in the Championship, we must have been looking at him thinking, oh well, now's his time to shine. For whatever reason, as you say, he was sent out on loan to Preston. I don't know if maybe he just felt it was time for a change. You mentioned the podcast you did with him, Chris. I don't know if it was in this podcast or something else I remember reading. When he moved up back to the northeast, I think he was living in the same block of apartments as Mick McCarthy. So maybe it was a case of McCarthy moved on. Roy Keane came in, and maybe he thought, yeah, I've had enough of living next door to me boss. I need to go somewhere else now and get a change of scenery.
Yeah. No, but it just seemed like it just didn't click with us. I remember talking to him and he had no excuses, but, he went back to Ipswich, had a good career, went Sheffield Wednesday, Huddersfield. So I had, it seemed like it was just one of these, and it happens from time to time. Sunderland seems to have these players where, and Kelvin touched on it, brilliant players elsewhere, and then suddenly, it comes to Sunderland and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, of course. And we forget, don't we? But these are human beings. There's so many moving parts. You move to a club. He clearly wanted to be here. It was not a lack of trying for him. But things, for whatever reason, don't always work out. And I think particularly in that team in the Premier League, we were struggling. You can't be too critical of any individual who suffered in that side, because they all put the effort in, and it wasn't going to happen. Maybe if he'd had a few more games in the Championship, he would have got back into form. But sometimes it's just a case of this isn't working out. He at least, as I say, he at least stuck in and did get that appearance towards the end of the season, by which point we were pushing for promotion under Keane. He's played in front of a big travelling support at Barnsley, who did all manage to get on the bus in time for the game. He perhaps looks back on it with a tinge of regret, but it happens. He's signed for Sunderland and pulled on the red and white stripes, which is a lot more than I can ever say I've managed.
Absolutely, yeah. And from memory, I'm sure he said he picked up an injury, and then by the time he got back from his injury, King's team were flying, and he had his players, and then basically he signed a 2-year contract to start with, and then towards the end of the season, we were looking like we were going to go up, and obviously, I think at the time we was like, well, we're going to go on to kind of better players and bring those in the summer. So, let's move on, because there's one more you want to cover, Andrew, and we go back to 1908 on the 20th of June. And England forward Arthur Brown, he signed from Sheffield United for a world record fee of £1,000. 600. So what can you tell us about him?
Yeah, well, this was quite a good one because we could have had it for the 20th of June or the 22nd. So it works nicely for holding it back for the end of the episode. We've done well keeping this one back. Either way, it falls into the week we're covering. He's moved up for this world record fee, and from what I can gather, I think it was agreed on the 20th in principle, but then by the time the paperwork's done and everything's registered with the authorities, it's the 22nd that it's confirmed. Arthur Brown is a talented player. We mentioned previously about lads who had other trades whilst playing. He was apparently a sculptor. I don't think you had many sculptors playing professional football, but that was Arthur Brown. He was a sculptor as well as a footballer. In 1904, he became England's second youngest international, which is no mean feat. 1904-05, he's the top scorer in Division 1. So again, this is a big name player we're dealing with. 1907-08, he's still with Sheffield United at that point, and both Sheffield United and Sunderland are struggling. He, however, manages to score, I think it's 4 goals against us in one game as Sheffield United beat us 5-3. And I think that's where he's come to the attention of Sunderland. These goals, even in a struggling team, and particularly against us, is what's made them go, yeah, we want a bit of this Arthur Brown. And that is when we make the move. We make this world record purchase of £1,600 in June 1908. And at first, to be fair, Chris, he's good for us. In his first season, he only misses the one game, and he finishes joint league and cup scorer alongside George Holley. So, you splash out all the cash. He comes in. He has a flyer in his first season. The crazy world of Arthur Brown, you could say he was on fire. And I'll be impressed if you get that deep cut, Chris, because that is a really old song. I can see Kelvin smirking at that one. But yeah, he comes in for all this money. He's on fire in his first season. And yet, 1909, 1910, he only scores 3 more for us. He misses huge chunks of the season. And by early the following season, October 1910, we've sold him on to Fulham, which on paper looks a bit of an odd one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I live in Sheffield, Andrew, and I know how tight they are down here. So it's probably no surprising that they ended up selling when it was like to a world record fee and pushing it up to that fee. But still, from what you've described, it's a bit surprising that they sold, even though the price was bumped up.
Yeah, but I think he'd suggested to Sheffield United that he was wanting away. So if you've got a player who wants away and you've got a club who are more than happy to spend big, you'd be daft to turn that down, wouldn't you? Yeah. Whether you're tight or not, I think that just makes good business sense.
Yeah.
The reason he ended up leaving, having made such a good start and having such a good reputation, there were rumours swirling around at the point of Sheffield United getting shot. Chris, he'd suggested that he maybe wanted to move on. I don't think he was particularly wanting to hang around at Sheffield United. But prior to signing for Sunderland, a bit like Jimmy Cowan, who we touched on last week, Brown had business interests elsewhere. Everton were desperate to sign him, but they had a policy that all players lived within the boundaries of Liverpool. But he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to give up his other incomes. So he said no to Everton. We seemingly at that point were happy to still take a risk on him. We brought him in, but the reason he fell out of favour and ended up missing so many games in the following season. He had a knee injury for one, but he refused to move to Sunderland. So you think, so hang on, you're already aware that Everton don't want to sign him because he's not willing to move to the area. Why are we now in this situation? But apparently, to give him his due, his wife, who he'd married before signing for Sunderland, she'd fallen ill, unfortunately, Chris. So he was not willing to uproot her and unsettle her from Lincolnshire, is where she was based. So he was travelling backwards and forwards from Lincolnshire, caring for his wife, coming up to Sunderland. The club weren't very happy about it all, and I think nowadays you'd perhaps be a bit more understanding as an employer. You certainly wouldn't suspend somebody because their wife was unwell and it was impacting your ability to move up at the Wearside.
Yeah.
So that was the background as to why we let him go, and Fulham obviously weren't bothered about him travelling backwards and forwards from the capital to Lincolnshire.
Yeah, but it was a strange, when you talk about world record fees here, because 1908, nobody had a kind of pot to piss in really, but and you're talking 1,600, but these things were debated at the highest level in terms of how much like players were being charged, and this was in the early days when actually this is when the process started, where players were looked at as commodities, because obviously it was always uncomfortable for pretty much until the Bosman ruling, when people started looking at this thing and saying, well, people are actually buying people.
Yeah, it's funny. And I mean, £1,600, obviously it seems like chicken feed now. But if you told me, Chris, that you were sending me £1,600 via your banking app this afternoon, I'd be over the moon with that. So it's still a decent amount of money. But you're right, players were being bought and sold and treated as commodities. And perhaps at that point, it wasn't being considered about the impacts on your personal life. If a club decided you were being sold to whichever team, how many times do you hear that story about players were taken down in a car to meet somebody at a service station? They didn't even know where they were going or who they were going to meet. They turn up, they go into the service station, and there's a manager sat there who's in charge of the club at the other end of the country, and you're like, oh, bugger. That's me signing for whoever. That's me signing for Plymouth, and I'm going to have to shift hundreds of miles away. Back in 1908, that was clearly the case. The club assumed that they could dictate to Brown, we've spent all this money on you. We're now telling you're going to move here, and if that means you can't look after your wife, tough luck. Not the way we'd do things now, I don't think.
No. Well, I've just had a look, and apparently £1,600 in 1908 had the spending power of around 250,000.
Oh, well, either way, Chris, if you want to send me 250,000 on your app this afternoon, fair enough. If you just want to leave it at 1,600, we'll settle on that.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it before you talk me into it. Oh, there's more.
No. More big money spending here, Chris, and I can see you panicking. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask.
You're going to get me into transferring this money before we're finished, aren't you?
Yeah, don't worry, I'm not going to ask. The interesting thing about Brown was, I don't know if you remember, but in an earlier pod, we did discuss Bob Kyle's spending at Sunderland, and we had a similar situation in 1925, pretty much along the same lines. We bought a player called Bob Kelly from Burnley. I think he was an England international as well, Chris. We brought the world record for him, which by that point was £6,550. Feel free to put that in your calculator and work out what that would equate to now. But we spent big money on Bob Kelly. We actually bought him a house for £800 in Sunderland. And again, despite spending a world record fee, he refused to move up. His wife, I think, ran a salon in Halifax. I think that's where I read it. A bit like Kelvin said, I can sometimes remember reading the stat, but not then where I read it. So we did it again all these years later. We've gone and spent big money on a player, paid no attention to what their circumstances were, what their family situation was. He's done the same. He's moved up to Sunderland, but in time, because he can't be with his wife as much as he wants to be, he ends up going to Huddersfield. The thing that really amazes me about this is they've got these similar stories, and then when you look at their past, Chris, Brown made 55 appearances for us and scored 23 goals. This Bob Kelly fella, he made 53 appearances for us and scored 15 goals. So similar backgrounds, similar records, and just it's mad now to think that you could potentially spend all that money on a player and not do the research beforehand and not have the conversations and say, look, we're about to sign you for Sunderland. It's pretty obvious now. Do you actually want to come here or not?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because actually I was just looking because we were talking about transfer records, and I was thinking about Alf Common, who was only a few years earlier. We'd sold him to Sheffield United, and he ended up returning after a few years because he refused to re-sign for them because he had business interests in Sunderland. So he came back up to Sunderland, and then in 1905 we then sold him to Middlesbrough for a world record fee of £1,000, and that was in 1905. And now we're spending 1,600 to break the transfer fee again in 1908. But it just goes to show that actually almost year on year. And how many times Sunderland are involved in these early stages in that transfer record being broken?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we were one of the giants of the game. I know that sounds big-headed to say, but we were. It was at a different time, though. So, as you quite rightly say, players were seen as stock almost that were traded. I think the club, when they did sell Brown, they replaced him with a lad who we bought from Bristol City called Jack Cowell, who was originally from Blythe. So maybe that's the answer. If you're going to spend buying these players, like we said earlier, just go down the mines, whistle down the mines, or check the birth certificate. If you're born in the northeast, however, get back up here, come back home, and then we don't have to have all of these worries about are we spending all this cash on players who don't want to move up.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, that's it. That giants of the game. That's probably a good place to finish our stories from. But we've still got, of course, time for this week's quiz, Andrew.
Yes. So next week, one of the dates we will be covering, as I panic and check my calendar and make sure I've got my schedule right. 25th of June, 1969. And again, it's a big money deal we're talking about. This player, who I'd like people to guess, was Sunderland's first six-figure sale. So, we've heard about Job leaving in the last couple of days, and he went for what? 30 million, we think. This player I'm wanting you to think about, we sold for £100,000. So at the time, a lot of money. He was a real prospect for us as well. He'd been born in Washington in 1949 and had captained the side when we won the FA Youth Cup. When he got into the senior team, Chris, he scored 5 goals in 4 games against Newcastle, which I'm sure endeared him to some of his washy mags. Having grown up in Washington, he probably knew a few who were from Washington but claimed they were 100% thoroughbred Geordie. And I'm hoping next week when we sit back down and talk about him and when we've guessed who this is, I'm hoping Kelvin has a couple of memories on him, because I think Kelvin will have watched this player in Sunderland colours.
Yeah, and I'm quite annoyed that I don't know this straight away, so I'm going to have to look that up. And Kelvin, he loves that. Kelvin's had to leave us because he's rushed off to a Martin Harvey fan club meeting. But he loved that youth side that we had in the late 60s, so he will know that. Click of a fingers, he will get that, and he'll love that one. But brilliant, that's one for everyone to chew over before our next On This Week. I'm going to be racking my brains because I genuinely hate that I don't know that.
I can tell, Chris.
It's really annoying. But we're going to have to leave it there. But brilliant, thank you very much, Andrew. Fantastic as always, mate.
Good fun, wasn't it? Cheers, Chris. We've had a good big crack there.
Yeah, and this was supposed to be a quick one, but
no chance.
That's it. Well, thanks again, everyone, for listening. We really appreciate it, all the feedback and everything like that. And of course, listen out for the next How We're the podcast, which should be dropping very soon. Keep a look out at the Roker Report website. They always drop on there, as well as everything else that everyone writes, especially this A. Smithson fella who writes some fantastic On This Days for us. All good stuff. Brilliant. And but from us, it's bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.